Okay, going. All right, looks like everything's up and running. Cool. So I just wanted to go ahead and cover real quick how you can do some cool stuff with the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. A question came up recently. Someone was asking about clusters and customizing the cluster radius. Basically, how large clusters be. They're going to cluster these features. They wanted to go ahead and control that with a slider in their apps, like this. All right, so I adjust that, so on, so forth, and bada boom, bada bing, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. So I figured I'd go ahead and look at that. So I basically did is I took the point clustering sample that is in the SDK for the ArcGIS API of JavaScript, and it actually gives some really good information about clustering. So we need to look at a couple of things before we get into using the slider to modify that, right? So the way that clustering works on the client is that you define this configuration object called feature reduction. And this feature reduction is going to be a type of cluster. And here's where you're going to provide the cluster radius, provided in pixels. Right, so 100 pixels, 200 pixels, 300 pixels, whatever you want your cluster radius to be. Basically, it's like screen space that you would cluster features on the map in the browser. You can have a pop-up template for the clusters, right? And this is typically going to be something, cluster count, the most popular one. I think there's options in here for doing like other like sum data of the clusters. If it's not there now, it will be in the future. So the minimum size and the maximum size for the clusters, right? So 24 pixels to 60 pixels. I mean, ideally, you don't want these clusters like boom, boom. You don't want them touching too much. You will have some overlap here and there in the map. But you can have some min size, max size on these clusters to fit the labels, right? And that's labeling of clusters is pretty important. That's something you want to do. And actually, I think that's not 416. I think 415 is when cluster labels really came in the 4X API. And then you have labeling info, right? So you can provide some labeling info. We're not going to worry about this. I'm not worried about labeling info. I'm not a big label guy. I don't really care. But they've got some suggestions for the configuration of other samples and blah, 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 and whatnot, right? So this configuration here is actually a module, a class in the API called the feature reduction cluster, right? Long name, but it's a very descriptive name. It is still in beta right now, and this is just because there are things being worked on for clustering on the feature layer. That's why it's considered beta at the moment. Some of the little APIs might change, but not, I don't think, too much. And if they do, it's for a good reason, and you'll hear about it. But basically, it gives you an idea here where you can just know how clustering works. It is a type of visualization, a rendering on the map, blah, blah, blah. So you can read more about it. But if you look at the feature reduction, it has these different properties on here. So we saw some of them: cluster max size, min size. Cluster radius is the one that we're really going to be messing around with, right? So you can see here that the type it takes could be a number, and this could be a radius in points. So if you can just provide 100, 200, whatnot, or provide pixels if you want to get specific. If you don't, it's going to convert points to pixels for you. But if you're a lot of times you're working with web stuff in the browser, you might want to get pixel specific, so you can do that here as well. So one thing to remember is that the API does have property watching. You can't necessarily just say that, you can't just come in and say layer.featurereduction.cluster radius is going to be equal to 200 pixels after you've already created the layer and it's already been clustered and maybe you defined 50 pixels up front. It's not going to know that changed, right? It's just you're just changing a property. Now the API does have property watching, so it does watch for certain properties to change, and it's typically going to be first member properties. Basically, if I change layer.feature reduction, then that would get picked up, and then the new feature reduction would kick off whatever new properties it's going to have. But if I did layer.featurereduction.clusterRadius, that's not going to kick off a chain of events internally in the API to adjust that cluster radius, because if it API tried to watch for every single property and nested property to change, it would just eat up memory and stuff, and would be a performance issue, and you don't want that. But there are things you can do. So basically, you're going to take this feature reduction, and pretty much almost all classes on the API are going to have, from the methods, a method called clone, right? So you're going to clone the feature reduction. You're going to change a property, in our case, the cluster radius, and then you're going to say that the layers feature reduction is equal to this new cloned feature reduction. So you basically clone it, so you keep all the properties of it. It's an exact copy of the feature reduction configuration. Change one property, then change the whole thing. You'll see this done a lot for things like symbology, renderers in the API, and other places. It's not a new concept. It's something that you do quite a bit in the API. So how can we use the slider widget to do something like that? Now let's take a quick look at the slider. So the slider widget, I mean, it's a slider. It's a really cool slider. It comes with the API, right? It's already built in, so you don't have to write it yourself. But it does have some events get kicked off. I skipped for a second. I saw resolving hosts at the bottom here, and I thought my internet went down. And yeah, okay, so here we go. It scared me. I thought it did. Okay, so the slider is going to kick off some events. Basically, thumb change. When you change the value of the thumb via the arrow keys or by keyboard editing, or thumb drag. So if I drag the slider, that's what I'll be watching for. Sometimes I may want to watch for both of these. I think you need to watch both if you want to know when both the keyboard change of the slider and the thumb drag have happened. But basically, I'm going to get, when I change that slider, I get a new value, right? But the thing is that I do not want to do this as I'm moving the slider. I don't want to change that value, because the clusters get recalculated for screen space so that they can get drawn. And if you're trying to change it on every minor little adjustment of the slider, it's going to kind of just slow things down. It's going to quickly change like that, and it doesn't really make much sense to do it that way. It's not smooth, because there's calculations going on behind the scenes. And the more data you have, the more pronounced it's going to be. So you want to wait for the state of the event to be stop, right? If that state is stopped, then you know that the slider, you've stopped interacting with the slider, and now you can adjust the cluster radius to the new value. So what does something like that look like? All right, so here's my cluster configuration. I basically just took the sample and added the slider to it. But my cluster configuration, I start off with a cluster radius of 100 pixels. I don't need to worry about the details of this. I create my layer. In this case here, I've got my my GeoJSON layer of earthquakes, right? And then if I come down over here, I'm going to create my slider widget. So my slider widget is going to have a minimum value of 100, a maximum value of 1000, which you can see over here. I've got 1000, 100 over here. I want this to be at the 200 mark. If I started my my clusters at 100 pixels, I probably should set it to 100. So since I'm starting at 200, I'll set the cluster radius to 200. All right, so now this matches what's already the default value in the map. I should probably save that as a variable in the app. That's okay. This is for demo purposes. Things don't have to be perfect. All right. So, okay, it's back down to my slider, wherever it was. Okay, here we go. Snap on click enabled. Basically, what this means is I turn this off. Basically, it means that if I click on the slider, it would snap to that value where I click. And because I'm focusing on interacting with moving this thumb around, I just didn't want to accidentally click somewhere and have it change it. You can see that this is very customizable. There's this property here, visible elements, where basically you can turn things on and off. So I don't care about having labels. I don't care about range. What I do, I want the labels, and I want range labels right here. So that's what these are there, right? So And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen for the event of the slider. All right, so I listen to the on thumb drag. I'm going to get the value from the event and the current state of the event of what's happening. Right, the start is in progress. I can't remember what's the start or stop. Right, so it's basically what you're going to get. So if the state is not stopped, then return. I don't care. Just get out of here. Just not do anything. Just I don't care, because I only care about when it's stopped. When it is stopped, I'm going to go ahead and clone the feature reduction. I'm going to update the cluster radius to a new value. And because it's a number coming back, it's going to be points, and it's converted to screen pixels and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And then I just say the layers feature reductions equal to the new feature reduction that I cloned. And what you get is something like that. Bam, bam, bam. All right, that's pretty nice. You can add this to your apps if you want to have something like this. I think it's kind of weird to have adjustable cluster radius in an app for users, but maybe you're making some kind of lightweight authoring app that you want to have, and you would do this, and then you'd save it and share that with users, right? This could be like, for example, and you can't see my labels here because, yeah, I'm jacking some stuff up. I think I broke some CSS in here. My slider widget isn't the right size. That was my fault. But basically, you could have this slider maybe only shows up when someone's logged in as a certain user. They can go ahead and change this around. Or maybe, I'm trying to think here what cases might happen. Oh, maybe you're reviewing something like 311 calls into your city or something like that, and you're getting, you've got thousands of records to go through for calls about broken street lights or broken stop lights, things like that. And you want to filter this cluster radius, something a bit more manageable or something like that as you're working with it, because that data can grow day to day and something, and maybe, for a smaller data set, something like this might be fine when you have a large data set, but when you really want to narrow it down, bam, you can do something like that, and then you get this nice looking clusters. That could be another case too, where you might want to have this customizable cluster radius inside of your application. I can see a couple of use cases for that. But yeah, that's how you can do it. Again, it's pretty straightforward. You can cluster your data. It's pretty cool. And the slider widget's awesome. I use the slider widget for a lot of stuff, and it's useful in a lot of the demos and everything too, because it does everything I need it to do. I don't want to have to write my own slider if I don't have to. But there you go. Hope you got something out of that. Go play with some clusters and play with some sliders. Thanks.